I'm going to share with you the experience that two men had in May of 1979 in the mountains of western North Carolina near the Linville Gorge. One of these men saw a drastic transformation. He transformed from arrogance to humility. And this transformation was spurred on by fear that he felt, that was tangible in his body and in his spirit. The fear from seeing the unknown transform before his very eyes into the known. This is episode 19. I'm Kaiser Rebel, and this is the story of Randy and Stephen. Randy and Stephen were work associates. They worked together in the town of Hickory, North Carolina. They weren't altogether great friends or anything. They had their moments. But at work, it was a typical male work relationship. They would talk current events or sports or fishing or what have you, giving each other a hard time along the way, a lot of ribbing, a lot of banter back and forth. But when I interviewed these two men last year, I saw two men who were very close friends, and they both said it was because of that night in the woods of western North Carolina. On a rainy 1979 May Friday morning, Randy and Stephen began their work shift at the place where they worked in Hickory, North Carolina. Now, Stephen lived in the city of Hickory. Randy had a hour-long drive to work. He lived further west in the mountains of western North Carolina, not too far from the Linville Gorge. And these two men would often see things from different perspectives. Stephen would see things from his perspective as a guy that grew up near the city, and Randy would see things as his perspective from being a person raised in the woods in the mountains of North Carolina. Now, not too long into the shift that morning, an odd, unexpected subject came up. You see, they walked into the break room, and somebody had tacked a newspaper article on the bulletin board at some point. And it was a newspaper article about knobby, which is what the folks in the South Mountains, particularly in the area of Kaiser, North Carolina, that's what they call their version of Bigfoot. And a conversation ensued, and Stephen very quickly blurted out, "That is complete hogwash. There's absolutely no such a thing." Randy said, "Don't be so sure of yourself. What you need to do, son, is you need to talk to some mountain folk before you arrive at these carved in granite conclusions." Randy said, "Those boogers don't just live down there near Kaiser or in the South Mountains. They're all over the mountains of the Blue Ridge and the Smokies." Debate ensued. It got a little bit heated, and Stephen said, "How do you know that, Randy?" Randy said, "Because I've heard them in the daytime and at night. And I have neighbors who've not only heard them, but seen them." Stephen very arrogantly, in a mocking manner, said, "I don't know what you heard, and I don't know what they heard or saw. There wasn't no knobby or no Bigfoot, because they don't exist." And Randy admitted at that point he actually became hot under the collar. And Randy said, "I asked him if he was calling me stupid and backwards or if he was calling me a liar." But Randy didn't give him the opportunity to answer, because Randy threw the gauntlet down. He said, "I'll tell you what, Mr. Know-It-All. You come up to my place this weekend, and I got a spot for us to go camp, and we'll see what a night in the dark woods of the mountains of North Carolina will do for you." Now, Stephen was backed up in that corner that we call the put up or shut up corner, and he really didn't have much of an opportunity to do anything but accept Randy's offer. He had run his mouth. Now it was time to put up or shut up. So that next morning, Stephen drove up to Randy's place in the mountains with his knapsack and a sleeping bag and a few other things, and Randy greeted him in the yard. And Randy said, "That grin on your face is going to be gone by about a half hour after sundown tonight, son." Randy drove him to a remote logging road about 2 miles from his house. these old logging roads, they're all over the mountains, and some of them are grown up and not traveled very often, usually only by hunters or people that hike deep into the wilderness. The place that he took Stephen was desolate and out there in the middle of nothing. The men parked, walked into the woods, and little did they realize that the next morning they would both walk out drastically changed men. As they set up camp, the banner continued. Stephen was just full of himself and full of mockery, making monkey noises and shouting things like, "I've got bananas for all y'all. I've got bananas for you. Come on down and get them. Save us the trouble. Come show yourself." And Randy warned him. He said, "Don't holler insults into these mountains because they'll come back on you." Stephen always had a smart wisecrack for everything. Late in that afternoon, Randy walked Stephen away from camp and into a nearby cove. Now, Randy's neighbor had hunted this area and had an experience there, which is actually going to be a future episode here on my show. But the neighbor refused to not only not hunt there anymore, he wouldn't go back to that general vicinity. But as they walked along, Stevens was still entertaining himself with his wisecracks and his mockery, saying things like "Yuns are dealing with moonshiners, is trying to scare y'all away. Speaking of liquor, y'all been drinking too much of it up here. Hey, I wonder if these monkeys drink liquor. We should have brought some liquor with us. We could have partied with these monkeys." And Randy was getting more and more and more tired of hearing Stephen's mouth. He told me when I interviewed him, he said, "I knew that the time was coming when the sun set that his mouth was finally going to be shut." So they arrived at the desired destination, and Randy said, "We're going to sit down and listen and watch and talk quietly, if at all." And Stephen had a few more insults to throw in there, and Randy finally said, "Just shut up and listen." Stephen said at that point he was realizing that he was riling Randy up and getting under his skin, and he said that he wasn't through with him yet, but for the moment he was going to stop with the wisecracks. But about a half hour later, the two men both clearly heard a long, deep frequencied, guttural howl that went on for 15, 20 seconds. Then they heard distinctive ape-like noises. It was dark by then, and the noises would stop and go a period of time, making the men wonder if it was over, if they was going to hear the noises anymore. And then suddenly they would hear more monkey sounds or howls or whoops. At one point, they heard an odd whistling noise. And it continued for a while, but then the sounds started getting closer to the two men's position. And Randy said at that point, he became uneasy and alarmed. He said that there was that feeling that a person gets when something's just not right, is what he experienced. That every fiber of his being was saying, "Let's get up and get out of here." And he told Stephen, he said, "Let's go. Let's get back to camp." Stephen had some wisecracks loaded for him. He said, "No, I think I'll stay here, but wait a minute. I better go with you so you don't get lost," and things like that. And Randy looked at him and said, "We're going to get back to camp because you've brought them on top of us." They headed back to camp the whole way, hearing various other noises. And all the while, although they were proceeding toward their camp, the noises still yet seemed to be getting closer. And they were just about back in the camp. And suddenly, there was not just one of those weird sounding, eerie, guttural howls, but several. And it stopped the men in their tracks. We'll pick up here this coming Sunday night for part 2 of episode 19. I appreciate all of you.